The wind had been cutting through town all afternoon, sharp as broken glass, and most folks had long since gone inside. I'd just stepped out of the general store with a sack of flour on my shoulder when I saw her barefoot, her dress torn hair, matted from dust and cold. She was moving slow, one hand clutched around a ragged shawl, each step leaving a faint smear of red in the dirt. She didn't look at me, didn't look anywhere, just kept walking like the ground might open if she stopped. The street was near empty, but it felt like every shuttered window was watching. She stopped a few feet from me, lifted her head enough for our eyes to meet, and spoke in a voice dry as the wind. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to make a choice that could change everything. My name's Will Crane. I was born a few miles east of here, on a patch of rocky land my father tried to tame with a mule and a worn-out plow. My folks believed a man's worth was measured in his word, and a day wasn't worth much if you didn't put your back into it. Sundays we closed the gate and read from the good book, no matter what needed mending. Neighbors were few, but if one called, you came running, whether to help brand calves or dig a grave. Those were the rules I was raised on. I grew up knowing the price of flour and the weight of a good handshake. The world past our fence line worked different. In town, men traded in coin and advantage, not favors and trust. The railroad brought speculators with shiny boots and deeds in their pockets measuring land they'd never work themselves. They'd buy a homestead cheap from a widow, then double the price on a cattleman who needed it. The law didn't always stop them. In fact, it often held the door. I'd seen good folks lose everything because they didn't understand how fast a man could take with a pen what he couldn't win with a gun. I spent years away from home hunting men for the army, and later for anyone with the coin to pay. I came back with limp scars and the kind of quiet that keeps company with regret. I bought a rundown place 2 miles past the last fence line, patched the roof, and put up with the solitude. It wasn't a life built for visitors. Most days I spoke more to my goats than to any soul in town. That afternoon in Bentwood Flats, the air had a weight to it, like the sky was holding its breath. I could tell by the cut on her ankle and the way she leaned that she'd been walking for miles, maybe days. Folks here don't stop for strangers, not unless they have to, and she didn't look like someone who'd get an invite inside. She didn't ask for help. She offered herself instead, as if that was the only currency she had left. I hadn't decided what I was going to do when the wind shifted, and the sound of hoofbeats came faint from somewhere beyond the ridge. I knew then we didn't have much time before someone else reached town. The sound of hoofbeats on the ridge faded as quickly as they'd come, leaving only the steady whine of wind between the buildings. She stood there in front of me, shawl clutched, tight eyes, rimmed red but steady enough to hold mine. I shifted the flour on my shoulder, tied it off to my horse, and gave the reins a light tug. "You coming or not?" I asked. For a moment she didn't move. Then her bare feet carried her forward, each step careful on the frozen dirt. We rode out of Bentwood Flats without another word. The last hitching post gave way to open land, and the wind hit harder past the fence line. She rode behind me, hands resting loose on the back of the saddle, too worn down to hold on tight. We passed an old cattle trail, a dead cottonwood twisted against the sky, and the charred skeleton of a wagon someone had left to weather years ago. The house sat low against a hill, one chimney sending up a thin line of smoke. The barn leaned, but still stood, its boards silvered from sun and wind. When I swung down, she tried to follow, but her legs buckled before her boots even hit the ground. I caught her by the arm and steadied her. My hand was rough from years of work, but I kept my grip gentle. Inside, the air was warm from the stove. The floor creaked underfoot, shelves lined with jars along the far wall. A single cot sat near the corner quilt, folded at the foot. I pointed toward it. "That's yours?" She sat, slow eyes flicking from me to the table where I set a tin bowl. Steam rose from the onion and carrot soup, a chunk of bread resting alongside. She ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days because she hadn't. I kept to the basin, rolling my sleeves to wash the road dust from my arms, giving her space. When the bowl was empty, she wiped her mouth on her wrist. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. She studied my face for a catch that wasn't there. I set the quilt at the end of the cot and headed for the door. "I'll be in the barn. If you need something, knock once." The latch clicked shut behind me. That night she slept under a roof that didn't expect a price, and I sat on a stool in the barn, rubbing the ache in my leg, wondering why I'd brought her here. The answer was already in my mind: she stays. By the time light crept through the cracks in the shutters, I'd checked the goats and swept the worst of the snow from the barn threshold. When I stepped inside, she was standing near the stove shawl around her shoulders, eyes wary, but not wild. "You sleep all right?" I asked. She nodded. I poured oats into a bowl, sliced dried apples over the top, and pushed the chair out with my boot. "Sit." She obeyed, still watching me like I might take it back. I left for a moment and returned with a pair of old boots. "Better than bleeding," I said, setting them beside her. She looked from the boots to me. "Why are you helping me?" I poured coffee for us both. "You were half dead when I saw you. Seemed like something a man shouldn't walk past. That was all." She took a bite of oats, hands trembling less than the night before. "You got a name?" I asked. "Mara," she said after a pause. "Will," I replied. The silence between us wasn't heavy. When she offered to leave, I told her her feet wouldn't make it past the next hill. "You can stay," I said. "Help with chores. You earn your keep, that's all." She agreed without much else to say. Out back, frost still clung to the grass. I handed her a bucket of feed for the goats. Her arms shook with the weight, but she didn't spill a kernel. I showed her how to refill the straw without wasting, how to bank the fire in the stove for a longer burn. She listened more than she spoke, and by noon, she'd patched a leak in the roof alongside me, scrubbed the basin, and boiled water for the next meal. Her hands were red and raw, but there was a steadiness beginning to edge into her shoulders. That first day passed without questions about where she'd come from or who she'd left behind. I'd seen the yellowing bruises and the way she flinched when I stepped into a room too quick, but I didn't press. The men I'd known before the war were quick to turn a story into leverage. I had no interest in hers unless she chose to tell it. We ate supper in the same quiet as the morning stew, thick with salt pork and beans. She washed the bowls while I checked the latch on the barn. By the third sunrise, Mara was outside before me, breaking ice in the water trough with an iron rod. She worked with sleeves rolled, breath fogging in the cold. I hauled feed sacks to the lean-to, my limp slower in the mornings, but never stopping me. We didn't speak much, but I noticed how she didn't startle as often, how her eyes didn't dart toward the door every time the wind pushed against it. Midday, while we stacked wood along the fence, she asked how long I'd been here. 3 winters, I told her, alone. She nodded once, then asked what I'd done before. Hunted men for the army. After that, for money. She didn't say anything for a while, then told me she'd been sold once by law when her father's debts came due, and once without papers to a man who thought he owned her. She'd run when she heard him talking about trading her for a rifle and a bottle. I didn't flinch or offer pity. "You're not running now," I said. "Not right now," she replied. "Then don't," I told her. "Not yet." After breakfast, we repaired a window, her holding the nails, while I hammered. By evening, she'd found the tools without asking, pulled the broken glass herself, and swept the shards clear. In town, whispers had started Will Crane coming in twice in 1 week, buying more than flour. Folks noticed the change in my face, but no one asked outright. Out here, the work filled the days. She saw me rub my knee by the fence post and came back from the house with water and a clean rag. "You need rest," she said. I told her I rested at night. She said I twitched and talked in my sleep. I admitted it had been worse once. She nodded like she understood. As the sun slipped low, we stood with the woods stacked waist-high between us. "You planning to stay through winter?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, then said she hadn't planned anything in years. I told her if she did stay, we'd need more kindling and the chimney swept before snowfall. No offer, no pressure, just a note about the work ahead. That night, she sat on the porch steps, shawl tight, watching stars come out. I stoked the fire, checked the goats, and when I passed her on the way to the barn, I set my hat gently on her head. She stayed there a while longer, fingers on the brim. Inside the house smelled faintly of bread and smoke, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, it didn't feel empty. By the end of her second week, the first frost had already settled over the ridge. The ground turned hard and the air bit at the skin before sunrise. I woke early and stepped outside to find her already at the stove, coaxing the fire back to life. She'd started doing that without being asked, same as checking the goat's water before breakfast or sweeping the floor in the evening. She moved with quiet purpose now, not like someone afraid to touch anything. I asked if she'd ever spent a winter out here. She said the closest she'd come was one season in Dead Ridge, but most of it had been behind a locked door. I told her these hills could turn mean in a storm, fences knocked flat by wind, water frozen solid, roads buried until spring. She didn't flinch, just asked what needed doing first. We patched the root cellar wall before the snow could push in packing feed sacks and straw into the cracks. Afterward, we split wood until our arms gave out, stacking it high against the side of the barn. Our days fell into a rhythm. Morning chores, then repairs, then the quiet that came with evening. She never asked for more than her share and never left a job half done. I noticed she had a way of leaving silence alone when it was needed. One night by the stove, she said I didn't ask her much. I told her I figured if she wanted me to know something, she'd tell me. She nodded at that like it was enough. Before turning in, I reached into the attic crawl space and pulled down an old wool coat. It had belonged to someone else once, but it was clean and warm. I left it on the chair beside her cot without a word. She asked if someone had lived here before her. I said there had for a while, but didn't go further. Some things didn't need telling. Snow came early that year, dusting the roof and settling into the porch boards. The cold pressed in sharper each morning. I checked the firewood twice a day, wrapped the windows tighter, counted jars on the shelves. She felt it too. There was a difference in how she moved, as if she'd decided this place was worth preparing for. Nights were still the wind, pressing against the walls. She admitted sometimes she woke expecting old shadows to be there, but she said it was different now. One morning, just after first light, I found tracks near the ridge. 2 horses had cut across in the night, keeping their distance, but close enough to watch. I didn't mention it right away, but when she saw me studying the tree line, she asked. I told her what I'd found. She asked if it could be him, the man she'd run from. I said maybe. We didn't panic. We made the house tighter. I brought down a box of ammunition, cleaned my revolver, checked the hunting knife. She lit the lantern and kept her voice steady. We worked through the day, sealing the back shutters, moving water inside, clearing the path to the barn. It wasn't fear that kept us busy. It was knowing that being ready was the only thing that mattered. That evening, over stew, I asked if she thought he'd come looking. She said he didn't let go easy. I told her if he came here, he'd leave with nothing. She met my eyes and said he wouldn't understand that. I said he didn't need to. After supper, she stayed by the stove watching the flames. I oiled the front door hinge so it wouldn't stick if we needed to move fast. She said that in the past, she'd always imagined running if she saw him again. Now she wanted him to see her standing. I told her I thought she was done letting people take from her. She didn't argue. That night I stayed inside near the front door instead of heading to the barn. The rifle rested within reach. She kept her boots by the cot just in case. But I noticed her breathing eased quicker than before. The snow kept falling outside, quiet and steady, and somewhere beyond the ridge I knew the man hadn't given up yet. The air felt like it was holding its breath, and I could feel something closing in on us from the hills. The cold had a deeper bite the next morning, the kind that made every board in the house creak and every step outside feel heavier. I'd been up before first light, scanning the ridge with my rifle slung across my back, but saw nothing fresh, just the memory of those horse tracks from days before. Inside, Mara had already tied her hair back and set a pot on the stove, moving with the same quiet steadiness she'd carried since deciding not to run. We ate without hurry, oats sweetened with a little molasses, and neither of us wasted words. After breakfast, I checked the barn while she salted the steps to keep them clear. By midday, the clouds had thickened, and the air carried a stillness that didn't sit right. I hauled a last armload of wood inside and found her standing at the window arms, crossed coat on. She didn't have to say anything. I could tell she felt it too. It was late in the afternoon when the sound came, faint at first, then clearer. Hooves on packed snow, slow and deliberate. I stepped to the door, opened it, and stood just outside. Mara joined me, stopping just behind my shoulder. A single rider came down the trail, dust-colored coat hanging loose over a thin frame hat pulled low. His horse looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He stopped 15 feet from the porch and stayed in the saddle. "She's still pretty," he said, voice rough. Wasn't sure what I'd find. Mara's voice was steady when she told him to leave. He smirked. "Ain't how this works. She stole from me." Her reply came quick. "I took nothing that was yours." "You don't own people." He claimed he had papers, called it a fair buy. I told him to bring a sheriff or a marshal to enforce them. But he didn't answer. "You think this ends with talk?" he asked. "I think it ends right now," I said. "You turn that horse around and you don't come back." His eyes flicked to Mara. "You think he'll keep you safe? Men like him, they break." She stepped forward, then her voice cutting through the cold air. "You already broke a long time ago." The wind picked up snow blowing sideways across the ridge. My hand stayed near the rifle, but I didn't lift it. "You've got one chance," I told him. "Ride out. No one follows. Don't show your face again." He sat there a moment longer, then spat in the snow, turned his horse, and rode off without another word. We watched until he was out of sight. Inside, we set our things back where they belonged. Mara stood by the table, her eyes still on the door. "I'm not shaking," she said. I nodded. "Good." We didn't speak of it much after that. There was no claim of victory, only the fact that she hadn't run and I hadn't had to raise my rifle in fear. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the fire banked low, she sat at the table with her hands folded. "I thought I'd feel relief," she said. "It's something else." I asked what she meant. "Feels like ownership," she said. "Like I finally chose what happens next." I told her she had. She looked over at me. "You didn't shoot him." I said I didn't have to. Her gaze stayed on me a moment longer. "You've changed," she said. I told her it was because she stayed. Silence filled the space between us, the kind that didn't need filling. She came over, and rested her hand lightly on my shoulder above the burn scar. I met her eyes, and my hand came up steady to rest against her arm. We didn't speak whatever this was. It didn't need naming. The wind eased after sundown, leaving the snow to fall straight and soft. Beyond the porch, the trail was already half covered, the man's tracks fading into white. Inside, the house felt different, still quiet, but not waiting for the next knock. I didn't know if he'd be back, but for now, the ridge was empty, and the door was ours. Snow kept to the ground after that day, though the wind eased. I didn't see the rider again, but I didn't stop checking the ridge each morning before the sun cleared the hills. The rifle stayed by the door, loaded and ready. Mara worked beside me as if the visit hadn't happened. Her hands red from the cold, her sleeves rolled to the elbow when there was a task worth doing. Inside, the stove burned hot through most of the daylight. She patched the lining of my coat boiled water in the mornings and kept the boots near the hearth so they'd be warm before we stepped out. I made sure the water bucket stayed full and the paths stayed clear. We didn't speak of what might come. The quiet between us was shaped more by focus than fear. One afternoon, while she was peeling potatoes at the table, she asked if I'd lost someone to the war. I told her no, I lost her after she left because I stopped talking. I explained how I couldn't speak without bringing the rest with it, and after 2 years she had enough. Mara sat across from me, her fingers resting on the table's edge. "You're different now," she said. I told her I was still figuring that out. She didn't push. Later that day, while gathering kindling from the shed, she spotted a gap in the barn wall where snow was drifting in. She fetched a board and hammer without waiting for me to ask, holding the nails steady while I set them. When we were done, I told her it was good work. She smirked and said, "You're welcome." That evening, I pulled a folded piece of paper from my coat, a discharge from the army after an ambush outside Iron's Hollow. I told her they'd said I'd done enough, but what they meant was they didn't want the weight of it on their books. The fire that scarred my shoulder had taken a child I couldn't reach. After that, I gave up the badge, bought this land, and waited to rot. She looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You're not rotting. You're living. You took me in when no one else would have." I told her she'd earned her place here. She stared down at her hands and said she didn't know what she was to me. Not a servant, not someone passing through. I told her she wasn't passing through unless she chose to. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was steady. "And if I don't," I told her, "then we keep working, and she keeps waking up here." The snow deepened over the week. The path to the barn had to be shoveled twice a day, and the goats stayed close to the shelter. The cold bit sharper, but the rhythm held us. Chores, repairs, quiet evenings by the fire. She'd begun to hum softly while washing dishes, and I found myself listening for it without meaning to. One morning I came in from the ridge with snow on my shoulders. I'd seen him again, just a glimpse far off, moving south. Mara was stirring a pot of oats when I told her. "Did he see the ranch?" she asked. I said I thought he already knew where it was. Her grip on the spoon tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Then he's coming back," she said. I told her he might not come soon, but he would. I asked if she wanted to leave before that happened. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. "And go where? Back to hiding behind barns?" "You said he doesn't let go easy. Neither do I." We spent the rest of the day tightening what we'd already built. I showed her how to check the rifle's chamber and clear it without fumbling. She salted the steps again and packed more kindling inside. I set a trip line with a bell near the woodshed, not to harm, just to warn. Every movement had purpose. By nightfall, the house was as ready as it could be. After supper, she sat near the stove watching the fire. I was at the table oiling the hinges on the front door. She spoke without looking up. "I used to think if I saw him again, I'd run. Now I want him to see me standing." I told her I thought she was done letting people take from her. She didn't argue. That night, I didn't go to the barn. I stayed inside by the door, the rifle close, not because I thought the fight would come then, but because I wasn't leaving her to face it alone. She kept her boots by the cot and slept without waking in panic. The wind rattled the shutters once and then moved on. Somewhere out in that dark, a man was planning his return. When he did, he'd find more than he left behind. The morning came colder than any, yet the water bucket by the stove iced over at the edges. The boards underfoot groaned with every step, I'd barely slept, not from fear, but from the stillness that settled in before something breaks. Outside, the ridge was quiet. No movement but the wind skimming the snow. Mara was already dressed when I stepped back inside, tying her hair with a strip of cloth. She poured water into the kettle and glanced toward the window. "Anything?" she asked. I shook my head. No sign. We ate in silence, oats thickened with the last of the molasses, both of us focused on the work ahead more than the food in front of us. By midday, the light dimmed, though no storm had come. The wind shifted slower but heavier. It was the kind of weather that made the land seem to hold its breath. I checked the fence line one more time while she followed with a satchel over her shoulder, food, bandages, matches. We didn't speak about where we'd go if things went bad. Running wasn't the plan. When we got back, the air had gone still. The bell trap near the woodshed stayed silent. But I still loaded the rifle and set it by the door. Mara stood at the front window, arms crossed, jaws set. It wasn't long before we heard it, hoofbeats, steady and close. I stepped onto the porch first. Mara came behind me, stopping just to my right. The rider came into view, same dust-colored coat, same low-brim hat. His horse was leaner now, but his posture hadn't changed. He stopped short of the steps, eyes shifting between the two of us. "You think last time settled this?" he asked, voice low. I didn't move. "You've got no claim here." He smirked. "She was mine to keep." Mara stepped forward, then her voice firm. "I was never yours." He leaned in the saddle. "I could take you now and be halfway to the border before anyone asked a question." My hand rested on the rifle, not lifting it, not needing to. "You'll turn that horse around," I said. "And you won't come back." The wind carried the words between us. He stared a moment longer, then spat into the snow and jerked the reins. His horse turned, hooves crunching, as he headed down the trail without looking back. We stayed on the porch until the sound faded. Inside, Mara moved to the table, her hands still steady. "I thought I'd be shaking," she said. I told her she wasn't. She nodded once. We didn't talk about it again that day. That night, I kept my seat near the door, rifle close. The fire burned low, casting light across the floorboards. Mara lay on her cot, boots beside her coat within reach. The wind scraped once at the shutters and then stilled. Somewhere beyond the hills, I knew he was thinking about the trail back here. The difference now was clear. If he came again, we'd be ready, and neither of us would face it alone. The next morning, the frost on the windows blurred the world outside, but I could still make out the steady line of riders coming down the ridge. 3 men, all on dark horses, moving slow but certain. The one in the middle sat higher in the saddle. Even before they reached the yard, I knew it was Sheriff Alden Price. Mara stood beside me at the door, her arms drawn tight across her chest. The sheriff dismounted without a word, his boots sinking into the crusted snow. Behind him, the other 2 stayed in the saddle, watching. He took his time walking up the steps, brushing the frost from his coat sleeve before speaking. "You know why I'm here," he said. His voice was even, but it carried the weight of something already decided. I told him we had nothing to hide. He looked past me, meeting Mara's eyes. "Folks in town say you've been keeping what ain't yours." Mara stepped forward. "No one owns me," she said, steady. The sheriff didn't flinch. "There's a man with a sworn claim," he answered. I asked him if he'd seen the man's conduct for himself. His jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter if I have. My job's to bring her in so the judge can decide." The cold bit harder in the pause that followed. I told him if there was to be a hearing, we'd both ride into town and stand before the judge, no backroom handing over. He studied me a moment, then nodded once. 2 hours, he said. "Be ready." He turned, stepping down to his horse. The 3 of them rode back the way they'd come, leaving a line of dark prints in the snow. Inside, Mara moved to the table and sat down slowly. "He won't listen," she said. "I told her he might not have to if the right words were said in the right place." We set about gathering what we needed: letters, the one witness statement from Mr. Harlan at the trading post, and the church ledger that marked her time here. By the time we saddled the horses, the sky was the flat gray of midday winter. The trail to town was quiet except for the creak of leather and the crunch of snow under hoof. When we reached the main street, folks stopped to watch. Some ducked inside, others lingered at doorways, eyes following us as we passed. The sheriff was waiting outside the courthouse, hat low over his brow. He led us inside where the air was warmer, but carried the scent of old wood and lamp oil. Judge Ellery Briggs sat at the front, his spectacles low on his nose, hands folded on the bench. He was older than I remembered, his hair gone white at the temples. The man claiming Mara stood near the front, his coat freshly brushed, boots polished. His eyes narrowed when he saw us. The judge looked between them, and then to the sheriff. "State the matter." The sheriff recited it plain, an alleged broken contract, a claim of rightful possession. When the judge asked for evidence, the man produced a folded paper. I stepped forward with our own Harlan's sworn note, the church ledger, and the testimony of Mara herself. She spoke clear each word, steady, telling the room she had never agreed to be bound to him, that her time in his camp had been against her will. The judge read both sets of papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. At last he set them down. "This court will not uphold a claim on a person as property," he said. The man started to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "If you have a grievance, it's civil. You'll not take her from here." The sheriff's eyes flickered toward me, unreadable, before he gave a short nod. The man's face darkened, but he said nothing more. When we stepped outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Mara drew a slow breath, her shoulders easing for the first time in days. As we mounted up, I caught sight of the man across the street, standing alone in the shadow of the feed store. His eyes followed us, and I knew this wasn't the last we'd see of him. The ride home was quiet, the sound of the horses carrying farther in the still winter air. By the time the cabin came into view, the sun was low, throwing long shadows across the yard. I saw the smoke curling from our chimney and felt the weight of the day settling. Still, there was a sense between us that something had shifted. The law had spoken, but the man's shadow lingered on the trail behind us. The morning after the hearing, the air felt different. The cold was still sharp, but the tightness that had lived in my chest for weeks had loosened. Mara moved through the cabin quietly, but there was a lightness to her step I hadn't seen before. We worked side by side that day, mending a gate, checking the hay in the loft, setting fresh water out for the horses. The rhythm of it felt steady, the way life ought to be. From time to time, I'd catch her looking toward the hills, as if making sure the trail behind us stayed empty. By late afternoon, the sun dropped lower, painting the snow in long streaks of gold and blue shadow. I poured coffee while she stirred the stew pot. We didn't speak much, but the quiet was a comfortable one. It was enough to hear the fire crackle and the wind pressing against the walls. A week passed without sign of the man from town. The sheriff didn't ride out either. The only visitors were neighbors stopping by with winter provisions and news from the settlement. Each time Mara greeted them with a nod, her hands never far from her work. One Sunday, we rode into town for the church social. Folks watched us come in, but this time their eyes were softer. Mrs. Talbot pressed a small loaf into Mara's hands, saying nothing more than, "For the ride home." It wasn't much, but I saw what it meant to her. As winter turned, the days grew longer, and the hillsides began to break free from the snow. We planted early greens in the garden, repaired the fencing along the south pasture, and planned the spring drive. Mara spoke more than small stories from her childhood, bits of songs she half remembered. She was building her own place here, one piece at a time. Looking back, the hearing hadn't just been about the law. It was about standing still when someone tried to take what was rightfully yours. about letting the truth settle in the open, where everyone could see it. The frontier had a way of testing a person not just in the hard seasons, but in moments when silence might have been easier. Now, when I watch Mara walking the fence line at dusk, I see more than the woman who arrived on my doorstep in the cold. I see someone who chose to stay to claim her own name and her own life. And I reckon that's worth more than any piece of paper ever signed. If this story has stayed with you, take a moment to think on the people who've stood beside you when it mattered most. Hold them close. Out here, that's the truest kind of wealth there is.